Owls in the Family, Chapter 2, Part 2. Last time, one of the research questions I asked you to do had to do with where are the owl's ears? And a lot of you found the answer. You said they are behind the eye. That's correct. But they're covered with feathers. So this is a cool picture right here of somebody pulling back the feathers so you can see the ear. Now, that is exactly like our ear, except that we have an outer ear which looks like this. But we also have an inner ear, a tube that goes inside. So this inner ear is here for the owl and it's here for us. But our outer ear looks like this, and they do not have an outer part. So what is the purpose of that outer ear? Well, it is to collect sound. Maybe you have put your hand up beside your ear so that you can hear something a little bit better. You're making the collector or the dish even bigger. And with owls, they collect their sound, but they don't do it with an outer ear part like we do. They actually, so if you draw an owl here and put the face, there's the eyes. Around each of their eyes, they have discs full of feathers, and they're sort of shaped to collect sound. So our outer ear collects sound. The disc around their eyes actually collects sound, and that is very, very close to their ear. Okay, so a little bit different. Here you can see on the skull of the owl, this would be the eyes right here, the eye sockets. And then very close to the eye, there are the ear openings. Okay. There was one thing about Mr. Miller. You couldn't stop him for long. Now he explained to us that it was probably a bad thing to climb to the nest because it would disturb the owls too much. He had a better idea. He took a hatchet out of his haversack and we set to work building something that he called a blind. What this was really was a little tent fixed on a platform of sticks high up in another tree, but close to the owl tree. It took a couple of hours to build the blind. Bruce and I went scrounging for pieces of wood, and when we brought them back, Mr. Miller hauled them up the chosen tree with a rope and nailed them into place. When he had a platform built, he hauled up the tent. The tent had a round hole about as big as your fist in the front of it. That was for the camera. According to Mr. Miller, you could hide in the blind and stay there until the owl thought everything was safe. Then, when the owl came back to her nest, you could take all the pictures you wanted and she would never even know about it. He sure must think owls are dumb, Bruce muttered to me when Mr. Miller wasn't near. She may not see him, but she could see that tent if her eyes were tight shut, and I don't think she's going to like it. When the blind was finished, Mr. Miller said he was ready to try it. You boys go off for a walk, he told us. Make a lot of noise when you're leaving. The books say birds can't count, so the owl will think all three of us have gone, and she'll never guess I've stayed up here in the blind. Okay, Mr. Miller, I said. Come on, Brucey, let's get going. We walked about a mile away to a little slough and started looking for red-winged blackbirds' nests. It was another nice day and we forgot about Mr. Miller until we began to get hungry. Then we went back to the bluff. Mr. Miller was on the ground. He had just finished the rest of his cold tea, but he didn't look the least bit well. His face was awfully white, and his hands were shaking as he tried to put his camera away. The camera looked as if it had fallen out of a tree. It was all scratched and covered with dirt. Get some good pictures, sir, I asked him cheerfully. No, I didn't, Mr. Miller said, and it was sort of snarl. But I'll tell you one thing. Any blame fool who says owls can't count is a liar. On the way home, Mr. Miller finally told us what had happened. About an hour after we went walking, the owl came back. She lit on her nest, and then she turned around and took a good long look at the little tent, which was on a level with her and only about 6 feet away. Mr. Miller was busy inside the tent, focusing his camera and getting ready to take the owl's picture, when she asked, "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo," and took one leap. The next thing Mr. Miller knew, the front was ripped right out of the tent, and the owl was looking him in the eye from about a foot away. Mr. Miller accidentally dropped his camera, and then, of course, he had to hurry down to see if it was all right. And that was when we got back to the bluff. I guess it wasn't a very good day for Mr. Miller, but it wasn't too bad for us. Mr. Miller said he had seen 3 young owls in the nest, and he thought they were about halfway grown, which meant they were about the right age to take home for pets. All we had to do now was to figure some way to get hold of them. Okay, that was a little bit shorter today. In the story, Mr. Miller had a hatchet. A hatchet is just a small axe. And he was chopping some wood and nailing it to make a blind. Okay, we're going to talk about this word blind for a minute. Now, blind means that you cannot see. But a blind is something you can build so that birds cannot see you, but you can see them. So it's just a piece of wood. Here we have a couple of examples. This one's actually a shed that you can walk into. And I've walked into these before. They have them at the bird sanctuary close to where I live. And you go in very, very quietly. There's a door at the back. And then you can look out through these little holes. But the birds, for the most part, don't really know that you're there. So if you have a camera, you can take pictures of them a little bit more easily. The boys talked about seeing red-winged blackbirds, and those live around here. They live everywhere in Canada. And then they talked about Mr. Miller using a tent. So I'm just going to show you what this would look like. So remember, there's this big tree here, okay? And the owl tree, let's say the owl tree is over here. So here's where the owl's nest is, right here. So Mr. Miller picks this tree and he climbs up and he finds a branch that's sticking out like that, okay? He finds a couple of branches and he puts down pieces of wood. Then he hauls this tent up the tree and sets it down on the platform, okay? Then the owl comes back to her nest and he thinks he's all hidden and everything, but the owl rushes over and rips a hole in the tent. And then, of course, poor Mr. Miller falls down flat out of the tree right on his bottom. And I found a few more pictures of owls, so you guys can imagine what the nest would look like. It would be a huge nest. When owls are first born, they are kind of fluffy. They don't have a lot of feathers yet, just a lot of fluff, and they're not really that cute. But they grow extremely fast. So they grow really, really fast, and it doesn't take long, and they start looking pretty cute there. Okay, so there's a great horned owl mama, and there's the chick, maybe a few weeks old, not very big at all. And then in no time at all, they get huge. In fact, very quickly, they're almost as big as the mother and the father. But even though they're really big in size, they have not yet grown their flight feathers, we call them. So they have a lot of fluffy fuzz and fluffy downy feathers, and then they have to grow for a few months before their flight feathers grow. And then when they get those nice long feathers like the adult has, then they are able to start practicing to fly. Now, something that's interesting in the book, boys and girls, I don't know if this occurred to you, but why are the boys going to take these baby owls as pets? We all know that that's not okay. So I looked up something for you. This is called the Canada Wildlife Act, and this is a law in Canada, and it says the wildlife area regulations prohibits. That means you are not allowed to do all activities that could be harmful to species, that's animals, and to their habitat where they live. Okay, and so why would the boys do this? Well, the book, as you remember, was written in 1951. This Wildlife Act came into law in 1985. So much, much later. Okay, and that's when people didn't realize how much harm they were doing to animals. They just liked collecting things, and they didn't really think about that would, cause the numbers of owls to go down. And they didn't really think about words like endangered or extinct. Today, we think about those words a lot, and we're really, really careful about that. But when the book was written, these boys would not have thought about that at all. And their parents wouldn't have thought about it. And so that was just something you could do. Now, today, if you try to do something that is against this law, then the government could fine you thousands of dollars, $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 or more, and you could actually even go to jail, especially if the animal that you're trying to capture or look at too closely is endangered. Okay, so those of you that studied the burrowing owl as a part of your grasslands, that is an endangered species. And if you disturb a burrowing owl, you will get fined way more money than that. Okay? All right, we have a couple questions today. Question. This is one I want you to do. This is the question you should do. How will the boys try to capture the owlets? So you're going to make a prediction. Think about a way that the boys will try to capture these baby owls. Okay? And an extra question for you is a research question. Now, Mr. Miller said that owls cannot count. Then when the owl attacks him and he falls out of the tree, he says, whoever said that is a liar because that owl knew he was there. So I have a question for you to research. Are there any animals that can count? They know how many things are there. They know how many babies they have. They know how much food is in a pile, anything like that, and see what you can find out about that question. All right. Good job, everybody.